Now, if you're interested in real estate, whether that's buying, selling, or investing in real estate, and you're not living under a rock, you have probably heard about the landmark decision from the National Association of Realtors to settle their case against home sellers, which is a class action lawsuit that was happening in Missouri. Now, because of that, the National Association of Realtors, with their proposed settlement that's still pending court approval, changed some of their business practices. And one in particular became very controversial across the entire country. And so why I wanted to create this video is because there is an aftermath that's happening from this news breaking. Now, real estate is hyper local. And so I can only really speak about my marketplace, which is what I would call the Seattle area. Now, I'm not necessarily only talking about the downtown or Seattle proper, but I'm talking about an area that's encompassing about 3 to 5 counties. The counties in particular are King, Snohomish, Pierce, Skagit, and Whatcom counties. These are areas that I work, and so these are the places that I can best speak about the aftermath of the NAR settlement. And so what I want to cover in this video is what has happened, what has changed, and what can we expect changing down the road. Now, before I get into more of the specifics, I probably should cover what was in that proposed settlement. Now, if you're watching this video, there's a pretty good chance that you may already know, but just in case you don't, let me just give a baseline. So the National Association of Realtors in their proposed settlement has said that they're going to change some business practices. Number one is they're going to require all buyer's agents to enter into a buyer agency agreement with their buyers. Number two is they're removing compensation from the buyer agency compensation from off the multiple listing service. Now, sellers can still offer compensation and they can still offer concessions to the buyer, but the offer of compensation is coming off the multiple listing service. As well as they're making it very clear that the seller has no requirement whatsoever to offer any such compensation to the buyer's agent. And so those were the business practices that were changed in this proposed settlement that's set to change in the mid-July. Now, how does that really affect the Seattle area? And so what I'm going to cover is just 4 points of how it's going to affect the Seattle area and what changes can you truly expect. And starting with the buyer agency agreement. See, the state of Washington in 2023 passed legislation that on January 1st, it will be required in the state of Washington for licensed real estate brokers, that's what agents are called in the state of Washington, to enter into a buyer brokered service agreement with their buyers. And so buyer agency agreements became required in the state of Washington as of January 1st. Now, why this is important is because in the buyer agency agreement, it's going to cover the length of the agreement. So there's got to be a start time and an end date. Also, it's going to cover the areas in which this agreement is good for, as well as if it's an exclusive agreement or non-exclusive. So there's an option that buyers and buyers agents can have in regards to whether to be exclusive or say, hey, we're kind of feeling out the waters and be non-exclusive. Also, it has a spot where a buyer has the choice to allow their agent to practice what's called limited dual agency. Limited dual agency is where the agent not only has a written agreement with the buyer, but they also have a written agreement with the seller. Now, in that, it can be really tricky, and there's other videos that I'll have on the subject, but really what it entails is that the buyer will lose some of their rights to agency representation, and their agent becomes more of a neutral third party. Now, like I said, I'll cover that in other videos. as well as on top of the ability for a buyer to opt in or opt out of limited dual agency, it also clearly defines what your buyer's agent is charging you. Now, wait a minute. I thought buyer's agents were for free. Now, that is an old adage that is in the real estate space that it has been 100% incorrect. There has always been a charge for buyer agency, but it hasn't always been clear to buyers what that charge is. And so now in those buyer agency agreements, there is clearly defined what is that charge. Now, if the seller is offering compensation, what happens if that amount that the buyer agent is charging is more than the amount that the seller is offering? And the agreement explains what happens in that case, as well as what happens if the seller is offering more compensation to the buyer's agent than what the buyer's agent has agreed to the buyer with. That is also covered in that buyer agency agreement, which I think is incredibly important. And it really creates transparency with a buyer to fully understand what is my agent charging me to represent me. And so with that, buyer agency agreements are now required. It is also gonna, for point number 2, really take on a form where there's gonna be more conversation around compensation. Why do I say that is because with this decision, they're now stating in their business practices that they're no longer going to require a seller to offer buyer brokerage compensation on their MLS. Now, I'm going to tell you this, that in the state of Washington, or specifically the Seattle area, we are a part of what's called the Northwest MLS. Now, something different about our Northwest MLS that is compared to some of the other MLSs across the country, or even in the state of Washington on the peninsula, or even in the Tri-Cities or Spokane, is that our multiple listing service is not owned by the National Association of Realtors or run by a realtor board. It's actually member owned, and so the firms in the area actually came together and owned the multiple listing service. And so back in 2019, it was upon the firms in the area with their review boards to make the decision to say already to sellers that they're not required to offer compensation. So in our area of Seattle, the Seattle area where I'm covering, this conversation around compensation has been happening for years. Sellers have not been required to provide buyer agency compensation. They've had a choice. And so even in 2021 and 22, our listing agreements changed to where they decoupled compensation. See, one of the discussion points about this settlement is that forms have historically had both the listing agent compensation and the buyer broker compensation as one lump sum, and then it gets separated by the firm. And so the Northwest MLS said, we're done with that. What is the listing agent compensation, and what is the seller willing to offer, if any, to the buyer's agent? And so it creates this transparency, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But in the changes for the Seattle area is buyer's agents are going to be much more competent in having that commission conversation. A commission conversation is incredibly important because nobody wants to work for free. I mean, even you watching this video, if your boss came to you and said, hey, today, congratulations, I need you to give 100% of your effort, but you are working for 100% free, you would say, no, thank you. And rightfully so. And so it's incredibly important to have those conversations with your buyer's agent to know what are they charging. Also, in another point, I'm going to share that it's going to actually elevate the customer experience. But before I get that, I'm going to share transparency. So transparency is incredibly important, and it's not getting transparent, it is being 100% transparent. And so the whole goal and intent behind this settlement is to create transparency with the buyer agency agreements, with removing the compensation from off the multiple listing service, meaning that that compensation should be freely discussed amongst both brokers, whether compensation is being offered or not. And so it's something where that is the intent behind these changes. Now, one of the things the multiple listing service did a few years ago is they actually published the buyer brokerage compensation on all public websites. So if you're searching in the Seattle area and you're looking for a house and you pull it up, there's actually a section that highlights what is being offered to that buyer agent or buyer brokerage. And so with that, it has complete transparency. So along with the changes of having buyer agency agreements now required, so buyers are going to be having those commission conversations. Not only that, but also as they're searching on public websites, they can already see what is being offered on that house. And so transparency is now available across the board in the Seattle area. Now, the last point that I just want to bring up is that the ultimate benefit or change is that there's going to be an increase of customer experience. What do I mean by that? See, agents do a lot of things throughout the transaction, some that the customer knows about, some they don't even know about, in regards to how an agent walks through and serves the client and makes sure that the contingencies are all being fulfilled, that negotiations are happening, that any waves that come up through the transaction, whether it's an issue with financing, whether the seller gets cold feet, there's all sorts of different discussions, all sorts of different things that are happening in this transaction. And so sometimes if you're just searching online, you may see someone say, hey, got another one pending. Wow, this happened in 3 days. Well, this is super fast. Oh, we were able to help this buyer. And you miss out on some of the nitty-gritties of the process. You miss out on the research that they're doing to make sure that you have the right option periods, the right contingency periods, the right due diligence periods to better protect yourselves. They're also communicating with the listing agent to really make sure that they fully try to understand. And why I say try is because a good listing agent is not going to give away their client's leverage, but the buyer's agent is asking specific questions to uncover how to better get your offer accepted, as well as better stay within your comfort zone and position. And so overall, with what's happening in the news, it is causing buyer's agents to create a better customer experience, a more transparent customer experience, where you as a customer are going to feel and know exactly what your buyer's agent is going to do. Now, to wrap up this video, I'm going to share that with the Seattle area and this settlement that has been proposed, not much is changing. Actually, right now, there isn't anything that's set to change in the near future in the Seattle area and those that are serviced by the Northwest MLS. But I think it's incredibly important to understand and know that even though the NAR Settlement proposed business changes, while they're happening across the country, Washington State has actually been on the forefront and leading the pack in creating a transparent customer experience. And again, I think this is incredibly important because we have all heard the horror stories of agents getting buyers to sign an agreement, or agents that show a buyer a home one time, disappear, and then expect to get paid afterwards. Those folks are going away. This time in the industry is going to create some amazing professionals. And that's why it's incredibly important that as you're watching this video and you're thinking about buying, selling, or investing in real estate, that you reach out to a local real estate agent, because they're going to give you the most up-to-date information and the true aftermath of this proposed settlement. Now, again, this is so early on in the process. It hasn't even been approved by the court, but it's one of those things, as news continues to break, I think it's incredibly, again, important that you connect with your trusted professional. Now, if you're in the Seattle area and you don't have somebody that you'd like to reach out to, always know that you can connect with me, and I'm gonna give you the truth about what is happening. Like I said, the media took hold of that information and created a lot of content out there that a lot of it wasn't true. And like I said, even the President of the United States had an address in regards to this information and shared incorrect information about it. And so I think it's important to get that trusted professional. And remember, in that Seattle area, if you don't have anybody, feel free to reach out. Would love to chat with you. You can always put a comment down below about a question in regards to this, and that way I can create additional videos to be a help. That's the goal, is really to provide the information of what is truly happening in this marketplace. So with that, I really appreciate you watching, and remember, no matter whatever's happening, whether it's lawsuits, settlements, that ultimately today is a great day that you can #create positive change. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, bell button, so that way you get notified on the next videos. And until then, my friends, take care and have a great day.